Weekly. Joe Moore, Kyle Fuller. How you doing today, Kyle?
Pretty good. I'm back here in Colorado, so yeah, feeling good. Looking at a bunch of snow here, and we'll be here for a little bit. So excited.
Happy to have you in Colorado for a bit. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
So today on the show we got a lot of really fun content, a lot of interesting news. Before we dig in, though, we just had a new blog come out today. Super funny. It was a great photo of Kyle and
Victoria and Dennis eating meatball sundaes at IKEA. Definitely check it out.
I was not so culturally adventurous. But the article's called Expanding Your Horizons, The Ultimate Guide to Attending a Psychedelic Conference. Just came out today on the 5th of April. So check that out. A few kind of conferences we want to point out coming up. It's a crazy busy time of year. Bicycle Day is coming up really soon. We should figure out a Bicycle Day episode. Maybe it's us, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, DiscoveryCon 2023, April 18th through 19th in the Bay Area. San Francisco. Check that out. I went last year. It was pretty fun. Use the code PSYCH for 30% off. PSYC today. PSYC today for 30% off. Breaking Conventions coming up real soon too. April 20 through 22 in Exeter, UK. I think this is the first time they've had it outside of London in a long time, right? Or usually
I think so.
Like Greenwich, really close to London. Yeah, so definitely check that out if you can get to southern UK. That's the one I'm most jealous of. That one's Psych Today BC, PSYCH Today BC 10 for 10% off.
And David and Johanna will be there. So if you're in the UK or want to travel to the UK, definitely go check that out. It's always been on my bucket list, but didn't work out this year.
And you'll get to run into one of our favorite psychedelic philosophers, Peter Swarstead Hughes, in Exeter. He teaches there. I think he's a professor. And it's really, really just cool to see that, people are taking psychedelics and philosophy quite seriously.
They have a whole program over there now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. If I was ready for grad school, I would certainly be considering it. And then Trailblazers, I'm going to be going to that one that's in New York City. It's kind of a businessy conference, April 24th through 25. I'll be part of at least one panel, I think. So that should be pretty cool. First time in New York City in a bit. Well, it's kind of true.
I thought you were going to say first time in New York City. I was like, no way.
No. I did the train from DC to Boston the other day, and I ended up in Penn Station, but total New York time 30 minutes. So just wanted to be honest. So yeah, check that one out, Trailblazers. I had a really good time at their other events. It was super fun. So, oh good Lord, somebody's in real time modifying our notes. So that's exciting. So Trailblazers is going on April 24 through 25, New York City. It'll be fun. It'll be really educational if you're interested in the business side and networking with some folks who are also in leadership positions. Next up, PsyCon in Portland, Oregon, May 19 through 20. And I think they're doing another one in the fall in Denver. But yeah, check that one out, May 19th through 20 in Portland, Oregon. And then
the big one.
The big one, mother of all conferences. You've been to two MAPS conferences, right?
Yeah, 2013, 2017. And they were both in Oakland, down in the convention center. Or convention center? It was down in like the business district, but super fun.
Like a convention center. It was gigantic.
It was huge. Yeah. It was really fun. And really looking forward to this year. I can't imagine what it's going to be like. They're estimating 10,000 people. I think in 2013, it might have been around like 1,200 people. And then 2017, I think it doubled. So it was like 3,500 or so. Now, like in 2023, they're estimating 10,000. So, it just even shows like how much this field has grown in the past few years.
It's a good marker. Yeah. And I think the first one was San Jose or something, and it was only 500 to 800 people.
Wow.
Doblin was chatting about that on the Rogan episode that came out last week. A worthy podcast. I know not everybody loves Joe Rogan, but that was a good interview with Rick, getting into a lot of really good details about where they stand and the challenges they're facing as a really unique entity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So their conference is coming up in Denver in June 19 through 23. Kyle and I will be there. It's going to be amazing. We got a 15% off coupon for you, PT15 for 15% off tickets. Definitely use that. Save yourself some cash if you're going to come. We're considering doing a small party, maybe TBD though, so don't hold us to it if we can't pull it off. But there's going to be plenty of entertainment for you in Denver. A lot of people are doing events and parties and dinners and all that. If you want to get some deeper time with folks, that's a good way to do it. But
and I don't know if we mentioned Psychedelic Science. I think we just said the big one.
Psychedelic Science 23, PS 23, they're calling it. Yeah.
And there's going to be some pre and post workshops too. I think some of the folks from the Groff Legacy Training are going to be there, and they're going to be doing breath work, maybe post conference. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of stuff happening there. So if you can make it out, we'd love to see you.
That's great. Did you get to see Jay?
I did. Yeah, I said hi to him at our LA event, and wish I had more time with him. Which I had more time with everybody there, honestly.
That is one of the problems. Set yourself up for limited expectations. You can't get 8 hours with everybody you want to get 8 hours with.
Yeah. Maybe really a minute and you're good.
Yeah, right.
If you're lucky with some people. Yeah.
Yeah, and like set the stage for meetings later. I think that's the key to this stuff. And I'm sure in the ultimate guide, Dennis gets really into it.
I think he does, yeah.
Yeah. So, check that out. Psychedelic Science 23. It's going to be amazing. June 19th through 23. I can't wait. It's going to be dope. So can you tell us a little bit about this course that we have coming up?
Yeah, so we have a new course on Psychedelic Education Center, and that is called Psychedelic Neuroscience Demystified, How Psychedelics Alter Consciousness and Produce Therapeutic Effects. And this is in collaboration with Manesh Gurn and Melanie Pincus, which they just released an episode on Tuesday. So definitely go check that out. David did a wonderful job interviewing it. He even had these 7 fun questions, and I think even asked Melanie or Manesh if they've ever eaten brains before.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Brains.
I appreciated it. So this is going to be a live class. There's going to be some pre-recorded material, but then you'll meet live, kind of like what we do with our Navigating Psychedelics course. It will run for 8 weeks, I believe, and it kicks off on May 17th. And you can learn more at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And if you sign up by April 12th, you will receive $100 off. So definitely go check that out and get that early bird discount. And if you want to learn more about the course before signing up, definitely check out the last episode that was just released so you can hear more about Melanie and Manesh and what they're creating. It's going to be awesome.
And we have some cool news. Marissa Green on our team was just highlighted by SSDP, Women in Psychedelics 30 Under 30. Marissa has been crushing it for us for years and years and years. And so thankful that Marissa's getting some recognition in the larger scene, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, she's really been behind scenes, right? I mean, one of our first employees did everything from editing the podcast show notes, uploading it, to all the art, producing media, social media. I mean, everything that's like any operation thing, Marissa has done. And we couldn't have done it without her. And she's a huge backbone here at Psychedelics Today. So I'm really glad that she was recognized in this article.
Yeah. So thank you, Marissa, and thank you, SSDP.
And congrats to everybody else that was on that list too.
Absolutely. So the first article we want to run through, it was a far more inspiring article than I thought. But New York Times put out this article featuring Roland Griffiths, titled "A Psychedelic Pioneer Takes the Ultimate Trip." Kind of a reference to the Groff book Ultimate Journey, I think. But
maybe.
Yeah. Let's hope. So I don't know. Like, what were some of your major takeaways? Like, I loved his optimism.
Me too. Yeah, and I was actually really surprised that he admitted that he did psychedelics to help treat, and how he was maybe a little hesitant towards it, and then even the questioning that came up around it. So for those that don't know, Dr. Roland Griffiths was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, and it doesn't sound like the prognosis is that great. They're saying maybe 50% chance he'll make it to Halloween, but with all that kind of doom and gloom of facing death or mortality, it sounds like Roland is pretty optimistic. I was reading through some of that and almost kind of got teary-eyed, reading how it was the part where he said he was hesitant about taking psychedelics, and really trying to examine, like, am I afraid to look at something, like why shouldn't I take this? And I was wondering, like, I wonder what his thought process was of doing this research, being involved in it so long, and then being like a a pioneer in the death and dying world, and to some degree at Johns Hopkins, of exploring psilocybin for that. And then maybe this hesitation comes up. But then I was thinking about it too, like, if you're kind of meeting mortality and death, like, life itself starts to become psychedelic, right? And you're like, do I really want to maybe go in? Maybe do I appreciate everything? And so he had this conversation with his cancer, and it was really, really interesting. And yeah, there was a part of me where I was like, ooh, that's like, it hit me, I felt it.
Certainly a bit spicy. And for those who don't know, Roland Griffiths, he should get a lot of the credit for the contemporary psychedelic renaissance, in that he put in so much time and attention to getting clinical trials through the FDA and funded, when nobody else really was doing it at scale. I think he was working on the early Hopkins stuff before most other places, right? Like, I think Strassman kicked it off in the I think mid 90s, but Roland kicked it off really shortly after that.
I think like mid 2000s they maybe got their approval and started research like late 2000s, early 2010s.
That seems like it tracks, maybe a little earlier than that, but yeah, roughly speaking. But Roland is responsible in large part to where we are today in this scene. Highly scientific, highly secular, which I think is okay. Like, we need that because that's where culture and science are. And the end of life anxiety, like, I think Erica Rex was part of those trials. I think she's still in conversation with Roland, and like, how do we pay respects? And he's launching a really interesting fully endowed chair and/or department at Hopkins to help steward psychedelics long term in a positive direction. It seems like it's a highly medicalized version.
That's what it sounds like, yeah. And most of those endowments and money will go towards patient care.
That's cool. Yeah. So actually delivering patient care is amazing. And if a university, endowment fund can handle that and support that, hell yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Roland's courage spoke through the whole article. Like, he's facing it head on. He's been a lifelong meditator, and I think that alone is really helpful, but I think the LSD trip definitely helped quite a bit too.
And I thought that was interesting that he chose LSD over psilocybin, and a lot of that research was oriented towards psilocybin. But then again, if we look back in the history, Spring Grove and stuff like that, I think they were using LSD and psilocybin.
They used a bunch of stuff like dipropyl tryptamine and a few others too.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I think it might be, for me, it's the length of exposure. And you're consuming micrograms of a substance, and that seems to me safer, especially with somebody with
that is true. That's a really good point.
But 25 milligrams of psilocybin, how dangerous is that really? But who knows? Like, it would be good to know more about the decision making process. But I also want to leave Roland a lot of room. At the in your end of days, do you really want to do random podcasts when you could be talking to New York Times?
Right. I know, it would be awesome if we could get him on,
but I'm not going to really force it and try to push it. Like, I want to respect his wishes and his space for sure.
There's the quote that if I'll read it, the one that kind of stood out to me. It said, I hesitate to take a psychedelic because I wonder what it was going to disrupt that. Then a question arose. Is there something I'm avoiding by not taking a psychedelic? Am I defending against some dark, fearful thing I'm in denial about? Am I papering it over with the story of how great I'm actually doing and I'm actually scared to death or scared to die? And I asked the cancer, what are you doing here? What can you tell me about what's going on? I got nothing back. Then I wanted to humanize it, and I said, I really respect you. I talk about you as a blessing. I've had this astonishing sense of well-being and gratitude despite everything that's happening, and so I want to thank you. This process, is it going to kill me? The answer was yes, you will die, but everything is absolutely perfect. there's meaning and purpose to this that goes beyond your understanding, and how you're managing this is exactly how you should manage it. And still, even reading that little segment just gives me chills. And I think it kind of gives me chills just thinking about that. Like, everything is absolutely perfect. Like, when I read that, it's like that same voice that came into me when I was dying, right? It's like, this is all how it's supposed to kind of play out. And that's just and it's interesting too to just think about, he's trying to develop a relationship here, right? And we talk about that so much in trying to navigate these experiences, right? Do you push it away? Do you not engage in it? Or do you actually try to develop this relationship, even though it might seem really silly, right? Like, I'm going to talk to this thing, I'm going to have a conversation with it, I'm going to engage with it, and maybe not tell it to, like, I hate you, why are you here, but saying thank you. That takes courage, I think.
Yeah. So I don't know, what do you think? Like, is that a process of meaning building? Is that like, so he cautioned, like, I don't think the cancer is different from me, it's part of me. And you could take that on 100 different levels, right?
Right, yeah.
But really, it's part of his body. It's really a result of, a number of factors. And what do you think, like, the utility of that kind of, like, conversation is, like, temporary anthropomorphization?
Well, it's interesting. I remember one time I was doing this massage, and it was right after a ketamine-assisted psychotherapy session, and somebody was working on, like, all that scar tissue in like my body. And sometimes there's, like, this negative type of, like, thought pattern of, like, oh, why does this hurt all the time? Like, I hate this, and it's all those little thoughts that you put there, right? And then the person was like, wow, it's gotta be really hard to just constantly say mean things to yourself all the time like that, right? And I really thought about that part of my body, and thought about, like, that injury, and I started to give it love, and the thing opened up in a different way, right? And so it's like, even just thinking about the thoughts that we hold in our body somatically, how that really kind of has an impact on us. And so, can you shift kind of the things that you're saying to yourself? And I think that's really big.
Energy goes where the attention flows, and I would love to see what, like, some people in somatic psych are saying on that kind of stuff. But obviously, sending negative stuff there is not the best. Yeah. This other quote: "My life has never been better. If I had a regret, it's that I didn't wake up as much as I have without a cancer diagnosis." So, longtime meditator, obviously made a bunch of progress, but cancer really kicking that into overdrive. I think that's really fantastic, and something we should, really be thinking about. And so, if folks want to learn more, check out the New York Times article and griffithsfund.org, GRIFFITHS fund.org. And I think it's worthy to learn more. It's also worthy to note that Roland, even in this New York Times piece, he said it elsewhere, he thinks psychedelics, if we play our cards right, could play a critical role in keeping the human race alive. This, like Rick Doblin said on Rogan the other day too, like, our humans staying on the planet for another couple hundred years is not guaranteed.
Yeah, and he makes this point around just the importance of aligning with, like, the cultural institutions here, and how we could have kickback, like, if things kind of get out of hand. So again, cautioning maybe what happened with the 60s, and how psychedelics got aligned with different types of movement, such as the anti-war movement and the radicalized youth movement and stuff. And so just thinking about, like, where's the alignment when it does come to psychedelics. And we are at this interesting point where there's a lot of, like, different sides, different opinions, right? And the narrative that I think has been driving most of the success toward legalization has been the medical and FDA approval, right? The science behind it. And so he was also kind of cautioning around, like, let's not make the same kind of mistakes that happened in the 60s, where we could get a kickback, because these are very important tools, and they could potentially, save humanity or help humanity move forward in a way. And so, it's interesting, right, to think about, like, how the field is evolving, and the challenging the medicalization, and thinking about, like, other ways, and could decrim have pushback. in the future, right? If it goes too one-sided, too many people are doing things, there's too much negative press. So it is this like weird balance, right? Because, I think most people in the scene have had experiences obviously outside of the medical realm, right? So, but we're also kind of needing to align with this medicalization for progressing policy.
And it's a confusing thing, of course, like the ethical thing for the feds to do would be to decriminalize and then work towards funding this research and working towards medicalization. But that's not really how it's going to play out. It's going to play out, hopefully, a couple states coming online, and then hopefully the feds getting their act together and saying yes. Well, really, I think FDA approval for MAPS comes next summer, like 12 months out or so, 12, 18 months out. And then we should see Compass have psilocybin 6 months after that. So we are going to have legal prescribable MDMA and psilocybin domestically in a relatively short window at the federal level, not just state level. And we just have to sit tight for a little bit longer. And then hopefully what happens is Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, we'll talk about them in a little bit, and hopefully other groups convince the federal government to fund psychedelic science so that, groups like the UCSF research group, UC Berkeley, Yale, etc., like, Ohio State, like all these groups get massive federal funding to do real deal psychedelic research. Like right now, everybody's fighting over scraps, and it's not great. Right. But given how many people are researching, using, suggesting there's medical benefit, like all of this, to me, means there's a massive obligation at the federal level to also contribute to research.
Yeah. And hopefully we continue to see that.
Yeah, right. I'm just realizing lately how broad of an interest base there is in getting psychedelic research funded appropriately. It's taken us forever to get to this point, but I think we're not that far off. I would say hopefully in less than 2 years we can get a massive amount of money. Hopefully we can get more sooner, but I just think it benefits all of us when we have better and more funded science.
Totally. Yeah, and again, I mean, we've brought this up on previous episodes, but just even thinking about people are doing this and, being like a science-based culture, don't we want all the data of understanding, like, how this is affecting people, how it's affecting communities, and being able to, like, really understand it so we can make a better informed decision around a lot of this stuff. But it's interesting that, like, science doesn't want to touch it, or the feds don't want to touch it and just want to continue this, like, just this bullshit narrative around the drug war, right? And it's like, I don't know, I'd rather be way more informed and have good science behind a lot of this stuff, so we're able to make better decisions instead of just being like fearful of like, oh, this old rhetoric and these old narratives dominating.
Right, absolutely true. And I think we're getting there, and the medicalization is a super bipartisan, as far as we're concerned here in America, bipartisan issue. When we start talking decrim, it seems to force polarization of sides, right? Yeah. So, and we'll get into that with some Colorado stuff and the PAC topic again, hopefully as well. But next up, thank you, Roland. Thank you, Roland, for everything you've done. You got us really far, and we're gonna, keep trying to get really good science together to help serve the planet and the people. So next up, from romper.com, the rise of mushroom moms. I don't know what Romper is. It's some sort of like culture mag, maybe.
I'm guessing so, yeah.
Yeah. So we actually knew a bunch of the people in here. Michelle Janikian got some quotes. She used to be with us for a while. Tracy T. I had a phone call with her the other day.
Cool.
She lives in Denver. Hopefully we get to meet up with her in the near future. And then also Rebecca Kronman, who's written for us. She's an ally as well. She works for does work with Planned Parenthood. I think she's also an LCSW, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. Yeah. So overall, it was a cool article. I think it highlights that mothers are a neglected segment of the population, just as that role of mother. Not that they're working or not working or anything like that. It's just we don't same thing with teachers. We don't really give them enough credit or enough resources to help them do what they're here to do, right? And they have to stay on this little narrow yellow brick road, otherwise some shit might go down. But I'm seeing it like in my world that more and more moms are interested in microdosing because it might be able to get them, and the article highlighted this as well, less drinking, less cigarettes, less substance use. So yeah, and then maybe mushrooms recreationally as like a supplement to their night out, or maybe they drink 2 bottles of wine. Maybe they can have a little bit of mushrooms and then feel better the next day and be able to even be better in parenting the next day. And I love the stuff about like the childlike state in the article. Did you get a chance to like poke around this one?
I did, yeah.
I got a kick out of that.
I mean, it makes sense, right? Like sometimes we forget what it's like to be a child. I think, one of the first times I ever ate mushrooms, that wonder came back, and it actually reminded me of an experience I had when I was a child. I remember the first time I ran outside. I got lost in my backwoods, like in nature. There's like these really beautiful springs that would pop up out of the ground and flowed through this like really beautiful green grass and under this like dead decaying log. And I remember as a kid like just thinking like I was in some sort of like dream world. And the first time yeah, I definitely was. Like this isn't real. Like this is way too magical to be life. And then yeah, one of the first times I ever had mushrooms, it was like that memory came back and go, oh, that's what it's like to be a kid, right? And as a parent, obviously you need to put your boundaries in place and protect kids as they grow up, but also get in touch with that like childlike side, right? Like for that creativity, that curiosity. I mean, I think that's probably one of the most beautiful things with like children evolving, the curiosity, right? Just being curious about everything. And I was definitely one of those kids. You tell me not to do something and I would do it out of curiosity just to kind of test to make sure people weren't like, telling me, I was the kid where my mom told me not to touch a stove, and I would touch a stove to make sure that she was, telling the truth.
She full of shit or what?
Yeah, exactly.
And that childlike wonder, I think, gives us more respect for how important the job is, hopefully. And yeah, I'm thinking about a few years back when I was probably like peak MDMA and mushroom use for me, which it would be lovely to get back there, but need to be working a lot less to make that fly. But just my ability to engage with people, under the age of 8, anywhere from like a year, infant to 8, like was pretty dope. It was so fun.
Right. Yeah.
And I was their favorite person, like a lot of these kids, because I could like somehow relate to them in ways others weren't able to. And it was, I want to blame the psychedelics.
Right, yeah, you kind of get in that like wonder state and like maybe not feeling as like weird of being creative, right? Like kids are always making up scenarios and wanting to play like fun games. Like, can you tap back into that and whatever, like go collect all your stuff and the trolls are out there and oh yeah, let's go explore, let's go like find these things.
To be clear, I wasn't I wasn't high.
yeah right.
Children.
No,
it was just like all around it, right?
But it helps you to remember that is a state and like this is a way of you possibly being, right? And I think for me it has brought back a little bit more of that curiosity. And another thing that this article mentioned, I forget where it was, but somebody was saying that like mothers are also using this microdosing, but also the macrodosing, and then also helping to try to heal intergenerational trauma. And I think about this, the one thing that they highlighted was like the wine mom, right? And really kind of highlighting that archetype a little bit and, how much maybe people use alcohol. And I've definitely seen it in, my friends or that have kids and, sit down, and it's how normalized it is. Like I remember one time I was hanging out with, some really good friends. Their kids are like my nieces. One of them's my goddaughter, and the grandmother was there, and the little kid came up and was like, "Oh, like can you come play with me after you finish your wine?" And it's just so normal, right? Because it's just that's the culture we live in. So then to kind of mushrooms are so much more taboo, and if people are microdosing, they're probably not getting in a state, whereas if you drink a few glasses of wine and maybe becoming a little bit more like your inhibitions are starting to get a little bit more loosened. And so, yeah, I just thought it was interesting that, they're highlighting how like normalized alcohol is, but mushrooms aren't, and then thinking about people using this to maybe better their relationships with their kids, like to stop maybe behaviors and patterns that were passed down to them, maybe because their parents like did certain things, and then that trauma continues to get passed down, and to use something to help break that. And that's definitely came through me in a lot of my inner work over the years. It's like trying to figure out like, what did my parents do, how did that affect me, how do I stop that so I don't make like similar mistakes, like how do I become more curious around that and go, oh, like I don't want to engage in that behavior. And I think that's a really huge deal.
Yeah, it's without these tools, like what tools would we have, right? Like AA, church groups, both not super duper effective, but it's something.
Some people find great benefit in it, but yeah, others not so much.
And we can say that some thing about a lot of things, right?
Yes.
So yeah, but like how do we? And psychedelics are obviously a big avenue, but we don't have any data, right? Like we can't say how effective, right? We say some people.
Yeah.
Same way. We expect more just because the data is so promising in other categories and other diagnoses, and but is it for real?
Did you ever learn about the invisible illness or hidden illness during the 50s, right? Like the housewife illness, where it's just like, drinking, taking medication just because there's like no purpose, right? It was just like becoming like the housemaker, and this was their only role. Like imagine if we had different medicines at that time, and they were exploring like could that impact them in a different way than smoking tons of cigarettes, drinking a lot, and using medication. Obviously, there's a lot of cultural and environmental things that were creating that impact, but what if we had other ways of dealing with those feelings other than the drugs and medications that are out there that just suppress and numb?
It would be really interesting, and I think the planet, or at least North America, would be in a very different spot. Amphetamine use was really, really high. I know some people in my lineage had that in those eras, and it's not great. Like use is different from abuse. This is like legit abuse. So it's like, and it doesn't end well. And that meaninglessness is a big deal. How do you make meaning in that weird, I don't know, peak trust in America phase?
Right.
Like peak black shiny shoes, and like really a rough culture to deal with. We've come a long way. I think I prefer where we are now over then, and hopefully we can keep going further. And with more research and more publicity like this, I think more people will experiment with microdosing and maybe even macro.
But it is a tricky thing, and just tossing that out there to folks that are using, right? Like coming out and talking about that, it could also be really dangerous, right? Just thinking about like DCF reports and stuff like that. Like a kid goes, "Oh, my mom like uses these mushrooms," right? And it's like, boom, and there is like tons and tons of risk there of actually like coming out and speaking about this, because obviously people are concerned around child welfare and safety, and taking mushrooms, does that make you incompetent? I don't think so, right? But stuff like that does happen, and you have to be kind of like mindful around it too, around how you speak about it. And I think it is a big deal for people to speak up around it and say, like, I'm actually maybe becoming a better parent here, and I'm not drinking as much, or I'm not doing this, and this is actually helping me, versus but there's that risk of getting your kids taken away.
Like, let us never ever ever forget the Indiana nurse from who was arrested for microdosing, and I think her children were taken away, and I think it got brought down to parole, but from what I recall, and she was looking at facing years, losing her license, losing her children, all from wanting to microdose and growing her own supply. So like, this is not risk-free territory. Like, we had somebody at our small event in LA. We'll give you a little debrief on that shortly, folks. saying like the DEA, the FBI, CIA, they're not watching, they're fine, they're actually really into what we're doing. I'm like, well, I don't know. I've seen a lot of evidence to the contrary.
That was a bold
here.
statement.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, like Cole from Denver, like this lady in Indiana, the guy in DC. There's a bunch of other big ones in decriminalized or very soon to be decriminalized zones, and the Zydor Church. Like, there's, yeah, you know, this is not over. And was it Don Jose Del Campos or something in Mexico? He recently just got acquitted, I think, from his trial, and which is amazing. But you know, people are still facing stark legal consequences for their psychedelic work, and yeah, we just have to continue to be careful. Any negative story helps to bolster the opposition, and so we have to be really, really safe as a result. Like, let's not bury stories. Like, let's share the stories when they happen, but let's do our best to make sure these stories aren't happening as much, right?
Yeah, exactly. And also just being honest around those stories that maybe we don't want to talk about, right? Like the shamans getting arrested, and, you know, people like, losing their jobs or careers for growing mushrooms, right? It's like, you know, because we also need to be honest about where we are at, like legally. And a lot of people don't really realize that, right? There's so much of the hype that's happening and within the media that people do think that it's like legal to be doing a lot of this stuff, and it's like, no, we also have to be really honest, because we, you know, could be putting, you know, your life at risk for legal consequences, right?
And there are, you know, let's also not hide that there are risks with these substances generally too, right? Like David Nutt's study that was published in The Lancet shows that psilocybin, LSD, and, you know, cannabis, MDMA are all wildly safer than alcohol as a category of drug in of themselves, but there's still risk, there's still harm, and then contextual harm too. Like I've kind of tried to retire from being a getting a little electrical show here, a bit of a cult buster, maybe is the way to put it. I've kind of tried to retire that. But there's a lot of that going on, and I just really think that if we work towards something like decriminalization, we might be able to make a bunch of progress.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna shut that light off. That's a lot better.
Some technical difficulties.
Yeah. So, you know, how do we continue to work towards safety? And I know you didn't read this one. I flagged it as something we shouldn't necessarily dig into, but there was a recent article in JAMA, a Journal of American Medical Association, discussing risks with psychedelic therapy, also syndicated to Mad in America a little bit, or Mad in America wrote a small article about it. But there are risks, right? Like clinical trials, like they're clinical trials, right? Like how can you convince regulators that these drugs need to be treated more specially than other drugs? Like, I don't know that you can, but this article is trying to point in that direction. Like, how do we keep people safe from sexual abuse, like the Jensen case that we talked about a bunch on the show before, or the Francois Borzat stuff, which is underground, but, you know, the only way to improve safety there is more openness and less legal risk, so people can share stories about abuse and harm. Right now there's nobody really funding that kind of stuff. But it's a big deal, and it happens, though, according to the MAPS data, their abuse rate is wildly below traditional therapy without drugs in the mix. So psychedelic safety, or psychedelic science, appears to be safer from a sexual predation perspective than traditional therapy.
And I guess we also have to take into consideration those numbers are pretty low, right, compared to like how much therapy is going on versus how much psychedelic therapy is going on. And I mean, that is a risk as this field grows, and especially I think for this. Well, yeah, again, it happens above ground, happens below ground, in the underground work, and I think, you know, it's just the vulnerability, how open people become, right? And so it's like, boundaries just get really mixed. And I think it is really important, like thinking about like other drug trials where it's like more kind of physical, right? You're not in this expansive state for like 6 hours where it's like those boundaries could get crossed. So yeah, I think having good ethics and training and all that stuff is going to be really, really important. But yeah, those harms are there, right? And then so it's not always healing for some people, right? It can be really traumatizing.
Sure. Rick talked about the suicidality risk from psychedelic clinical trials, and he was speaking mostly particularly about his with MDMA, and there was only one case in the whole trials of somebody having an increased suicidality risk, and that was a person that was in the placebo group. So I think that bodes really well. I think in tryptamine based stuff and ketamine based stuff, I'm sure it's going to be different than MDMA. So it's something we need to watch for. That said, weaning off of SSRIs, your suicidality risk goes up like crazy. So, these are traditional meds that are already approved. So we also have to like flag a counterpoint.
Yeah. And I also, wonder, bringing in my background in like spiritual emergencies, just thinking about like some of the stuff that could happen to folks, like having big openings, and we don't need to classify it as spiritual, but just having some sort of big psychological, emotional opening, and then thinking like, needing to do 180s, right? So, thinking about, this topic of like being a parent and taking psychedelics and realizing like, oh, like I need to like leave the family. I'm sure it happens, but how much harm does that cause to maybe the family unit? We talk about that often, just prepping systems for change when it comes to psychedelics. So yeah, those risks and harms are always kind of present. And yeah, just thinking about like suicidality, thinking like maybe how much of that is like existential despair increasing after like a really big philosophically challenging experience, being like, what am I doing here, right? Like, how do I operate? Or like realizing everything in your life just isn't working out, and having that realization on psychedelics. And so I think, those harms are definitely present, and we just have to keep talking about it and being honest, right?
Yeah, like I had some really disappointing scenarios develop when for a little while, I was calling myself the psychedelic police, because everybody was coming to me with complaints of ethics and like sexual assault and all this stuff. And I'm like, I have no resources to do this. I'm going to try my best. And I would get roped in and try to like do my best to help. I don't think I ever helped, but maybe a little bit on the Francoise thing. But often communities want it to be really quiet. And my thing is, no, like this person needs to be removed. Like there's no way that somebody with like four to 10 abuse allegations against them, we can trust that they can be rehabilitated and trusted again in that kind of scenario. Right.
Yeah.
It sucks. Like I wish I didn't have to say it that severely, but it's kind of true. So yeah, we just need to keep developing this whole context. Like what is the right path for us? And, like I don't think we should slow down the research. I think we should increase our spend dramatically and radically on it. And in time, we'll have a culture that can handle this stuff well. Thankfully nobody's dying in psychedelic sessions, really. So we're in good shape there relative to other drugs.
Well, and when you said like, have a culture that does it well, like, I'm just always reminded, yes, even though like there was research that happened in the 50s and 60s and all the indigenous lineages of those who've used medicines, I mean, this is just so new for us. And, yes, we were probably babies in the 50s and 60s. This time around, it's like there's a little bit of maturity. People have like fumbled. We're learning a little bit more. But we're still pretty new and kind of in its infancy of like, what is this? How do we like find the ideal type of like environment to do this in? What are the ideal containers? Like, who should be doing this? It's like we're still so early in exploring it. And I mean, there are going to be a lot of fumbles and kind of like a lot of, things that happen along the way. But, how do we keep learning from those things that do happen and try to make it better, right? Okay, like, people are very open and vulnerable during these states. Like, how do you double down on like, maybe ethical practices and boundaries. And, again, I mean, they talk about that in therapy, but how often does that happen? I mean, you can go look at reports, and it does happen quite often, even with like pretty significant training.
Yeah. I grew up Catholic. And I would still think it's safer to send my friends and family to psychedelic therapy than to the Catholic Church. Yeah, that's my dig for the day on those people. So anything else on this parenthood one?
No.
Moms. Like, I just love that there's more discussions on moms. I'm hoping Tracy T out there from Moms on Mushrooms is willing to work with us more. And I was glad to see Michelle Janickian's name in there again. Out there in the world. It's great. So, check out Plant H. Is that right? PlantPH.com. And then momsonmushrooms.com if you want to learn more about them. I was pumped on this one. Marijuana Moment reported on the NBA lifting its ban on marijuana and new deal with Players Union, according to report. I'm pumped. Like, this is actually a really big deal, and it kind of like, in a fun way, transcends federal cannabis laws. It's like, nope. Like, this is part of our players' lives. It doesn't matter if they're in a legal or illegal state. Like, they should be able to use.
Right.
And it came at the end of like a lot of bargaining. So there's like the Players Association, and then there's like the Basketball Association. I thought that was really cool. They were like part of the whole bargaining process.
It's pretty wild to think about, because I feel like, a lot of sports have really kind of like, hedged against it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is a lot of these players are using cannabis, and just even thinking about like the NFL, right? It's like so many of those guys probably use cannabis for pain management, and to say like you need to use these drugs or substances versus ones that may work well for you, kind of shitty, right?
Yeah, their bodies are in such bad shape. Like, I'm an amateur athlete. My body hurts a lot from my sports. And these guys are going hard from probably like age 10 or even earlier. Yeah. And they're like 25 with the chronic pain of a 90-year-old in a lot of cases, right? Yeah. So how do we, like, if this is their choice, fuck yeah, like, go for it. And I really was actually inspired by the Olympic runner they had in there. I can't remember her name, but she got in trouble at the Olympics for testing positive for cannabis. And she's like, and this is a really bad paraphrase of the quote, but like, I'm proud that if this is, the best thing I can do for cannabis policy, like, hell yeah, like, this is great. And it's a really cool, like, civil disobedience act to like get in trouble. Maybe she didn't do it on purpose, but like, hey, let's get in trouble, make it high profile, and then like, I'll take the consequences, but it's an activist play. Right.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, it was a really cool quote in the article. It reminds me of like Gandhi and MLK a little bit. Like, yeah, I know I'm breaking the law. Like, fuck yeah, get me.
Well, sometimes, and that's when things change, right? Is like somebody finally comes out and like admits something that's going on, and advocating for reform, right? Like,
this is cartoonish, but I'll bring it up. Like, one of my favorite things Gandhi did was like led a huge march of lots of people in India explicitly against the law, breaking the law Brits wanted. I think it was around like you had to buy salt and it had to be taxed and all this stuff. When salt for those cultures is life. Like, without salt you're gonna die. So like they led a march all the way through and like got the salt, brought it back, and like there was a lot of arrests, I believe, and maybe some violence. But cannabis, comparing that to salt, maybe not the best analogy, but it's also like, cannabis is a plant that's been with us for so fucking long. Salt's been with us longer, but it's a big deal, and it's essential for so many people. It saved so many lives. It can divert people from other substance abuse issues. Like, I know of people who just like holed up for a week or two on edibles, and their opioid addiction was gone.
Wow.
Well, just imagine the doses required.
Yeah, probably a lot.
I'm not in for that treatment. Yeah. It makes Ibogaine sound appealing. But yeah, like, how do we just keep looking at this from a human perspective? Like MLB removed cannabis not that long ago, And I think they're even now selling CBD sponsorships in the MLB. UFC in 2021 said they weren't going to test people. I feel like that's ridiculous that UFC was doing it, but whatever. I bet there's some regulatory shit with the state of Nevada. That's where a lot of their action is. So maybe like it's not always just the organization. It's like an organization in context. And then I thought this was really interesting about the NFL. People can't be suspended for drug tests anymore. They might have a fine, but...
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
For all substance. Huh. Yeah, I found that amazing. So that's a big deal. And then the final thing on the NBA was they're just not going after anybody. Like if you look like you have a real problem, they'll approach you and try to help you, I think.
Yeah.
That's what the article made it sound like.
I mean, I feel like that makes sense. Like if you're like, you're working for this team and then you show up like completely high and you're like, fumbling the ball, can't, that makes sense. Should be on the
coach and the owners, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't know why the NBA needs to do it, but it's like the coach and the team generally is like, we want you to be a high performer. You're not a high performer. Peace.
Right.
And yeah, like, I hope it keeps developing in a hopeful way, and they can continue being leaders here. Like I'm really impressed.
And how is that going to like shift the cultural narrative, right? Like sports play such a huge role in our culture, and like if the acceptance starts to come into these establishments, like does that help to change the narrative?
Aaron Rodgers brand pre-roll smokes.
I mean, even just like Aaron Rodgers coming out talking about his ayahuasca experiences. Like, I mean, my dad is a huge Packers fan, like diehard cheesehead, and I mean, it was like as soon as he heard that, I mean, he just kept asking me questions about it. He's like, "What is this thing? Like, what is he doing?" And and it's like. I mean, obviously, my dad knows what I do, and like what we do here at Psychedelics today. But to start to have a little bit more of a curiosity around it, because like the quarterback from his favorite football team is doing this, and now it's like, whoa, what is this? Like, I'm kind of curious. Versus like, him asking me a question. He's like, I just don't understand what you do, right? Like,
yep, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, athletes can be and have been a huge kind of cultural ballast and cultural influence set. So it's really hopeful. Like I'm hopeful about like the fighters, the extreme sports athletes, and hopefully eventually a lot of bigger sports like soccer, football, etc. People will come forward about their psychedelic experiences as well. It's just going to take a little bit longer because the ground isn't really safe yet.
Yeah.
Unless you're somebody like Aaron Rodgers, who it's like tenured professor level at the institution. It's hard to fire that guy. Yeah. So I'm hopeful, and I think this is a really good angle. Like, and we covered, I think, the two of the three biggest pillars here for the movement. Moms, amazing and hugely impactful when telling important stories, and then athletes, and then soldiers. Like, those are the three most convincing bipartisan groups that will continue to shift the narrative in really helpful ways, in my opinion.
That's a good point. Yeah, that is a really good point.
So onward. Next up, Psychedelics Coalition grows its advocacy footprint. So this is actually exciting for me to see. In Politico.com, Melissa Lavasani's Psychedelic Medicine Coalition. I'm a board member there.
Yeah. What's going on here? I mean, I feel like you probably have like a lot of different insight, even just compared to the article, right? Because you're probably meeting with Melissa and you're on the board. You're understanding. So
we had a meeting yesterday. So the PAC, the Political Action Committee, is what they're kind of highlighting here. So a PAC, what it can do is route funds from donors to politicians' campaigns. So if you make certain kinds of campaign promises to us, we can help get you elected. Like, these funds can go towards that. So anybody can donate to this. And the PAC will identify really strategic politicians and really strategic areas to help us move towards, better science funding and hopefully a good federal policy eventually around this stuff. So that they're very different organizations. So the PAC is purely to help people get elected.
Right.
And then the lobby, I think it's a 501c6 or something like that. I'm not super good with the IRS. They're one of they scare me a little more than the DEA, honestly. But so that organization, the C6, Psychedelic Medicine Coalition versus Psychedelic Medicine PAC, the coalition is actually lobbying politicians, their staffers, and educating to say, hey, like, there's really good reasons why psychedelics should get more federal funding for research. Like, it's purely the Psychedelic Medicine Coalition working towards research funds. There's some speculation out there that they're trying to push for federal decriminalization, which is absolutely not true. The full effort of the work is getting funding for science, which it's absolutely inappropriate how little funding comes from the feds for psychedelic science. And one of the issues is, like, all the science right now, by and large, is funded by private interests, and the data coming out isn't necessarily the kind of data scientists want to work with or policy people want to work with when developing their plans.
Right. Yeah, like this big biotech company is just throwing a bunch of money into their product and the research, and it's like, how biased is that versus like coming from the Fed trying to get some sort of, I don't know, maybe non-biased approach. Maybe the Fed would have some sort of agenda of, like, again, like, can you show the harms of this? Because I think even Roland was talking about in those early years when they showed positive results, where they got their funding from the National Institute of Mental Health, correct?
NIMH, yeah, I think so. And maybe some from NIDA, but probably NIDA wants you to prove that drugs are bad.
And maybe it was
is more hopeful.
Yeah, maybe it was NIDA, where I remember listening to this on a podcast or hearing Dr. Matt Johnson or something talk about this, but how they showed the positive effects, and they were like, that's not what we were hoping for, right? They were hoping for something a little bit more negative to kind of meet their agenda there.
That's how David Nutt got fired.
Yeah. And I could be wrong about that. Do your own research and dig into it. It's been a while since I heard that, but I mean, but that's exciting to finally, because I mean, before this, like, how much education was actually happening in
DC, like, near zero.
Yeah.
Like, there was a little bit of work from MAPS, like Lebecki from MAPS does some lobbying, but I think it's mostly around the MAPS agenda, which is great. Like, it's important. Yeah, I know for sure there's some veteran groups going up, but I think they only got a start in the last year or so. But I'm not super clear on what they're up to, but probably how do we get funds over to the VA for them to do some stuff, which is cool, great. But larger is how do we get federal funds to just help everybody? Vets should be included in that, and they'll benefit too from enhanced research, right?
Yeah,
because it's not like, the MAPS compass, like the two therapist dyad and one experiencer client, like, that's not necessarily the perfect solution. It's not necessarily the case that what we have done is the optimal thing for the future.
Right.
And we have, room for better molecules that might be safer. I'm hopeful for a safer MDMA. That's like a really wild idea to me. Like, MDMA is already pretty friggin' safe, but if we can make it safer, hell yeah. Of course we should.
Yeah.
Same thing with LSD and psilocybin. Like, I don't even know how you can improve the safety of those. Some people say removing the trip, but it's like, well, that's not what I'm.
Or with LSD,
about.
I don't know. Maybe shortening the trip might be kind of nice. But,
that sounds convenient.
Yeah.
Yes, well, please. If anybody's on that,
convenient for clinical, right? Because I think that's going to be like the hard thing for clinical use is just the long duration, right? But
it's a new product now, LSD 0.5. Can we just go half LSD with half the length? I'm like, oh, fucking finally. Yeah, and I think there's different clinical indications for, like, why you would want to do that, and
totally,
like, reasons, and it's not just psilocybin or LSD. It's like there's a lot of room for new molecules here. Yeah, and I'm hopeful that these federal dollars could go towards that. Psychedelic Medicine Coalition is still raising funds. We're looking for members. So if you're a drug developer, if you're a venture capitalist, if you're somebody who really wants to see a brighter future for psychedelics internationally and in the States, I think this is a really good place to put it, because obviously we need more science, and if we get more science, we can help more people. We can help more people smarter. And it's I think a better use of capital than just like, let's do an arms race.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, like arms race is just wasted capital. Like that's what bankrupted the USSR. If that's your game, cool. I don't think it's the right game, but yeah, like let's be a team player. And if you're out there and looking for causes to support, this is one of my favorite causes because it.
Well, I think this will have big impact, right? If like education's
force
happening,
multiplier.
and because I'm sure there's as you mentioned, like a lot of people don't even know really about anything about psychedelics, and to go in there, advocate, educate, like that's going to be a big thing. And I hate to bring this up, but for those that watch like that whole TikTok testimonial, I was just like, some of the questions that some of those people asked.
I don't know this. What is
oh
this?
my God, watch it. And it really just was like, are they really asking a question?
This is like a Washington D.C. hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah. These people need more education, guys. Like,
yeah.
Like there's implications for even VPN. Like your life could be destroyed for using a VPN, and it's like there's obvious reasons for a VPN.
Yeah, but I mean, like some basic stuff. They're like, does TikTok connect to the Wi-Fi?
Good Lord.
You're just like, what? So you can imagine that this is something that's in the pockets of everybody. Like you kind of know how social media and telephones work at this point. So just thinking about psychedelics, I mean, I'm sure people just don't know anything about it. And of course, they probably had their.
But it's
agenda.
catching on.
It's catching on. Yeah. But
yeah, like when we were there in DC, we were only educating Republican staffers, and we got some stuff that was like kind of weird pushback, but it's like it's because they don't know the clinical data. And once you pitch the clinical data to them and show efficacy, cost savings, and like a happier, healthier, more productive population, like fuck yeah, like they're all in, because everybody has a little bit of disdain for business as usual in the psychiatric industry, and then you start adding on chronic pain plus psychiatric stuff, which it's not really like there's a clear boundary there. But
yeah.
And then other conditions we might be able to treat, like it's an obvious yes, but we have to craft the narrative carefully and educate carefully.
Why mostly like the Republican Party?
It seems that most Democratic lawmakers are already up to speed.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like not fully, but there's less resistance. And I don't really understand why that is. Like, maybe their friends made them read Michael Pollan or something.
Right.
I don't know. But you're more inclined to be listening to NPR and get exposed to Michael Pollan's op-eds, or
right.
Matt Johnson being on there once in a while, or I don't know. This is all speculative. I don't have a real answer. But it's really cool to see that there is movement. And I started simmering on this yesterday. Like, say you donate to like a Hopkins, like it can help fund a trial, right? But if you donate here, your 20 grand or 8 grand or whatever you're donating could go 500x further by opening up federal funding for these research institutions. And
which then could hopefully then change drug policy too, right? Like you
will.
might have a bigger impact there than maybe just like one research thing coming out of Hopkins. Exactly. Maybe, I don't know.
No, I think it will. And it makes drug development easier because you have more research to lean on. Like MAPS did what it did partly because there was so much research on MDMA already. And they were able to say, oh, look, we didn't have to fund these $1 billion in studies. Like we could just lean on existing data.
Right.
And so drug development could be quicker. Treatment just generally could be better, more efficacious, safer, more broad. So let's see what happens. So thank you, Melissa, and folks, if you're looking for a place to park some cash and invest in our psychedelic future, this is where it's at. Psychedelic Medicine Coalition and the PAC. They've just brought on some really great lobbyists that are showing us the ropes inside DC, and Melissa's really ramping things up. And this is super bipartisan. It's worth noticing. Crenshaw from Texas, Mace from South Carolina, AOC from New York, Rand Paul's in the mix, Cory Booker from Jersey's in the mix, and Lou Carrera from California's in the mix. So this is like a really big tent that we're building.
Am I seeing that correctly? There's only like 3 folks from the Democratic Party, and then 1, 2, 3 from the Republican Party.
Yeah, they're doing an equal mix on this quote from Politico here. So yeah, like, and there's more. Like there's deep allyship here, and this is a major topic in Washington, and to be giving them really good, high quality data, like, I think it's essential at this point in history, given, I don't know if, I think I mentioned this on the last episode, but, you know, we were going like, thinking 22 suicides a day from the veteran population is what's going on. It's double. It's more than double, like 45 a day now. Unconscionable, you know, and to the Republican lawmakers, you can say, okay, like, this is just another part of the war. You know, if you're funding the war, you should also be funding this. Like, it's not okay to not treat your people super well afterwards.
Yeah, if you're funding the war, you should definitely be funding health and, you know, wellness afterwards too. Right?
Yeah.
My friends that just have exposure and, you know, go to treatment for the VA. It just sounds so shitty.
It doesn't sound fun.
No.
And, you know, it's not all the VA, right? There's other organizations, and there's reasons why the VA isn't up to people's, you know, up to snuff for everybody. But it does a lot of good work, but it's, you know, how do we get it straightened out? I think psychedelics are one way in which we can substantially lower the cost burden on the VA overall. So a couple more, we'll kind of blast through some of these. Arizona is looking at, I think, doing a $30 million grant for psilocybin research, and the bill is HB 2486. And it would establish a legal framework for universities and nonprofits to conduct clinical studies on the use of psilocybin for treating. Interesting. Sue Sicily's there in Arizona, so I wonder if Sue would be able to take advantage of some of this cash too. It'd be amazing. Sue's an amazing researcher, folks. If you're not familiar with her, check her work out. We have plans to get her on the show. She just wanted to delay a bunch because she had some really big stuff in the works. And the House Military Affairs and Public Safety Committee approved the bill unanimously, 15-0. So
that's pretty impressive.
It's really optimistic for Arizona. I don't know if I'm ready to be in Arizona again all that much, but I'll come if you guys will have me. But it's going to be interesting. I think there's a lot of room for education for clinicians that we could all help with, and researchers too. So the bill aims to focus psilocybin research on veterans, first responders, frontline healthcare workers, and people from underserved communities. So good rundown of folks. Yeah. Next up, that article is from 12news.com. Next up, what can communities do to prevent psychedelic healing centers? From governing.com. This one I thought was going to be about Oregon, but it was about Colorado.
Prop 122.
So it was interesting because this is kind of like a bunch of months late, saying, okay, is there anything we as municipalities can do to block this stuff? Because people are really uncomfortable in many rural districts here about increases in crime, like increases in vagrancy, increases in, you know, all sorts of undesirable behaviors. I think it's mostly kind of like trumped up complaints and like fears based on what they saw with cannabis. I don't really understand the logic, though. I don't know.
Well, again, I think drug war narrative has like really dominated most of people's perspectives on substances, and so I mean, it sounds, and you know, I think you did see this a little bit in Oregon too, right? More of those rural communities tried to vote against those service centers to operate in their county or town, and so I think it's probably the same thing, and you know, I don't think this is really like to one specific state. I think you probably see it everywhere, right? You have more cities that are maybe a little bit more liberal, they understand things a little bit differently, and then you have like more rural communities that, you know, maybe thinking about things much differently, right? Like I just even think about with like Jersey, for example, you know, it was really interesting. I think they voted like 64% yes on cannabis legalization. I could be wrong about that number. It's been a while, but I think it was like 90 plus towns voted against like having any sort of like any sort of like grow operation or retail store.
It's kind of like what we saw in Oregon too, right?
Yeah, and it's because it's the fear. Oh, you're gonna like, and I'm just thinking the shore town, because a lot of those shore towns did vote against dispensaries and stuff like that, because it's like you're gonna ruin the family kind of shore image but it's okay to have alcohol there and everybody to get wasted. So, I think it's just, again, it's just the narrative that has dominated around a lot of these substances, not having a lot of education. And, sometimes people are just like, not in my backyard. I remember years ago, where I grew up, there, we really got hit hard with the opioid epidemic. I mentioned it on the podcast many times before, but I've lost tons of friends and kids from high school from that. And I remember one town next to me, they wanted to put a treatment facility in, and everybody in that town said, not in my backyard. And they voted against it. And so it's here's a problem. People are dying. People are struggling. But we also don't want this treatment facility in because it's actually going to localize those people that use substances, and it's going to create crime, right? Those people are going to escape the treatment center, and you're going to all of a sudden have crime and more drug use in my backyard. And I think that just, it's kind of like a kind of collective mentality when it comes to a lot of this stuff. And so I'm sure it's a lot of the same fears. Okay, we live out in this rural area. It's nice, and people don't like change. I grew up in kind of a rural-ish area in New Jersey. I mean, it's starting to become much more developed as people from New York move west into New Jersey, and it's a little bit cheaper. And even noticing kind of my mindset of oh no, they're going to be building more stuff here. It's I love the farmland, and thankfully a lot of that farmland is preserved and protected. But I can resonate with that change. Oh, I don't want this whole new thing coming. It's I like to look at my farmland and have the environment protected. And so I could imagine a lot of people in those those more rural settings don't like change as much, right? They don't want new developments to come in. They don't want new kind of businesses coming in, because it kind of changes the comfort of where they're at, right? Mm-hmm. But if you live in a city where things are always progressing, that's your sense of normalcy. But where you live somewhere where life doesn't progress that much, you're just more attuned to the trees and animals and farming and this and that, you're going to probably oppose new development and new business. Mm-hmm. At least that's my perspective from growing up in a more kind of conservative rural area, and kind of seeing the change that's happened over the years and hearing how people kind of think about it.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to throw out one quote. Cokedale, it's quite a name for a town in Colorado. Cokedale trustee Bob Holman said there are many specialty healthcare services that are simply not available to residents in rural areas of the state, and psychedelics shouldn't get special status. So I don't totally understand the argument there. So the argument is that psychedelics aren't mental health care services, and that's what voters in Colorado have established that they want, is a more clinical frame around psychedelics, and the law would actually say that no municipality or county can ban in the same way Oregon did. And I think it's a nice thing, because there's some really poor rural communities that this will serve well,
right?
I think.
Well, and I think that quote, brings up just an interesting perspective of why aren't there specialty things available to folks, right? Mm-hmm. And I could get why maybe that person said that, right? It's maybe you need some sort of specialty healthcare, but there isn't the resources for it in that community. But now all of a sudden psychedelics will become legal, and now you want to put a service center when maybe we need I don't know, some sort of cardiologist there, instead of having to go to the cities 50, 100 miles away for some sort of service. But now all of a sudden I can get psychedelics in my backyard.
So it's how does a rural community attract a cardiologist?
Mm-hmm.
Number one. And then number two, these things people are going to want to set these up because there's money to be made. So there will be a democratized access. And yeah, I'm hopeful it is accessible when it gets rolled out. We'll see. Time will tell. I'm hopeful Colorado does it right. I'm also a little dubious that we're going to do it right here. So next up, just blasting through because we're a little over on time. The Crimson. So the Harvard Crimson had something. Experts discuss psychedelic policy in the global north at Harvard Law School webinar. So this is the first time I've seen Harvard Law get roped in. We've had a number of other Harvard groups do some interesting stuff, but yeah, I think Pam Kriskow was there. I forget who else. David Nutt was there, and there was some representation from Australia as well. Yeah, and I think a general theme was everybody's saying we need to move fast around policy and funding and science. And I think, again, a call for PMC, Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, like directly in line with getting federal dollars applied here so we can do good science. People are using at higher rates than ever in history, right? Like, it's got to be alarming for clinicians that the underground's spiking like this. Thank goodness it's not like people are using heroin at record levels. It's probably also true, but at least these aren't things that we generally perceive, you and I at least, as ruining people's lives. It's largely helping people. Besides like some minor like destabilizing, right? Usually pretty helpful, right? People usually have healthier or they're more interested in healthier lives, giving up certain like habits, behaviors like food, maybe exercising more, and aligning to something that feels good to them. But it's nice that people from Australia, UK, America, probably Canadians were represented too. Like, it's really great that this happened at Harvard Law, and there's a lot of influential people that have been through Harvard Law that probably have cash to donate and connections in Washington, right? Yeah, so it's pretty great. Isn't there another organization out of Harvard Law? Poplar? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think Mason Marks was tied in there. I don't know what his status is with them anymore. But there's, that was a legal group too. It just wasn't Harvard Law, but it was a kind of a legal think tank of some kind. It might probably still exist. Yeah. So just great progress. I'm glad this is at Harvard, where kind of it became notorious in America first. And, again, that kind of cultural stigma, I think Harvard has been a little kind of like wanting to stay away from certain things, right? I mean, we hear that from colleagues in the Boston area and just trying to like work within there. It's like, there's still something there from everything that happened. Yeah. And that's for people who aren't in the know. There was a long history with Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, Walter Pankey, probably a number of others like Houston Smith. This whole legacy organization that was doing massive amount of psychedelic stuff, research, stuff that kind of transcended the scientific method at times, and some outright fraud too. Tim Leary at the Concord prison experiments, like this is in the Joe Rogan with Rick Doblin, talked about how the team actually kind of got a little tricky with data. It's not like the opposition doesn't do this either, but it's like, our data should be as pure as possible, so that we can never be called to question, right? Right. Yeah. Speaking of the Joe Rogan, was there anything interesting that Rick had to say on there? I didn't get to listen to it. I thought I had it downloaded for the plane ride home, but plenty. I learned, I think about 10 things I said here, partly informed by what Rick was saying. So, they're going to be able to get to the finish line anyway. They slice it, it'll work. It's better if there's more philanthropic dollars that come in so that a nonprofit can fully direct the public benefit corporation, which would be the pharma company, which is not a nonprofit, and all the revenue would come back up to MAPS and then be able to fund more psychedelic research at scale. I thought it was interesting that they're discussing a licensing arrangement for Korea with a Korean pharma biotech group. They wanted the rights for all of Asia, which is interesting. I would have loved to hear what he had to say about the stuff with MindMed Australia and TGA and MDMA. He didn't get into that. Not really, no. So we'll see what goes down there more as that develops. Anything else? He just had a lot of really good stories. He talked about parenting again, around how do you have these conversations with your children in an intelligent and careful way. I remember there was somebody running for town government here, and they were opposing my girlfriend, who was big time proponent for cannabis in town, and they were like, I don't want to walk by this cannabis sign on Main Street because I don't even know what to tell my daughter about this. What do I tell my kids about what that is? And I'm like, do you tell them that? What do you tell them after your 7th glass of wine? Because you're a notorious drunk. And it's how do you justify that kind of drug exceptionalism? A woman tried to lie recently, say that wasn't her. really drove me crazy.
Wasn't that all on High Profits? Or
yeah, so everybody, you can check this out. High Profits, CNN series, 5 or 6 parts about Breckenridge and cannabis in Breckenridge, if you want to get a glimpse into my world. Don't know where it's streaming these days, but I know you all are really resourceful out there.
It was a good series. I watched it a number of years ago. I think once we started the podcast, you mentioned that.
Yeah. That was something. That was something to live through.
You can imagine.
I've seen very few. I think the only thing that's been that like toxic for me politically has been Prop 122. Yeah. Losing faith in the opposition and all this kind of stuff. It's really hard. But I hope to figure out how to remediate that in the future. So we'll see.
Guess we got to go down there and do some networking and get to know some folks.
Shaking hands, giving some I'm sorry hugs, maybe. But yeah, all right. I think that's it for now. Anything else you want to throw in?
No, I don't even know where we're at time. We're recording.
We're a little over.
A different
we're an hour
way.
20.
Oh, whoa.
So let's wrap it. Again, there's a Psychedelics and Neuroscience course kicking off. Check that out at Psychedelic Education Center. Ton of conferences coming up, so check all those out. So Breaking Convention in Exeter, UK, Discovery Con in the Bay, Trailblazers, PsyCon in Portland, Oregon in May, and in June, Psychedelic Science. It's going to be fun. If you can make it, it's awesome. If you can't make it, there's going to be a lot of stuff on YouTube, and you can catch up there.
And we'll probably see you at another conference in the future.
Odds are good. And yeah, we'll probably be developing all sorts of stuff, so stay tuned here. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Kyle. See you all next time.
Thank you.